I want to welcome you to our Animal Justice Academy Lunchtime Live. I'm Kimberly Carroll. I am the AJA Director. Our topic today, can dogs and cats eat plant-based? And I'm so happy to have all of you passionate and compassionate folks here with us live, and also welcome to those of you who are watching the replay. Folks, we're here because we care about animals. All animals. So I know it breaks a lot of folks' hearts out there to be contributing to the intense suffering of other animals, not to mention the environmental impacts through what they feed to their dog and cat family members. Well, there have been a couple of new studies, really big new studies that could really change things. And we have Andrew Knight here to help us break these studies down for us. I'm going to give you an official, welcome and bio, but Andrew, hello, welcomes. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, good to talk to you from the United Kingdom.
Yes, you're many hours ahead of us and probably many light years ahead of us in knowledge. So Andrew, let me just give folks a little bit of background on where you're coming from, okay? So Andrew is a professor of animal welfare and ethics and founding director of the University of Winchester Center for Animal Welfare. Andrew's also an adjunct professor in the School of Environment and Science at Griffith University in Queensland. And as an experienced cat and dog veterinarian, he's also a European, American, New Zealand, and RCVS recognized veterinary specialist in animal welfare and related fields. He's had around 150 academic and 80 popular publications and an extensive series of social media videos and several websites, including sustainablepetfood.info, which Kirsten will put in the chat, on vegan companion animal diets, on climate change in the livestock sector, invasive animal research, educational animal use, humane clinical and surgical skills training, and other welfare issues. Andrew, we are so happy to have you and your wonderful expertise here today.
Thank you very much for that kind welcome. I should say I'm delighted to see people from all reaches of the globe, it seems. Great to meet everybody out there. And I should say I started off probably like many of you. I was an animal advocate from Perth, Western Australia, helped to launch the national campaign against our live sheep export trade, which was the biggest one in the world. So perhaps when you've all gone through Kimberly's Animal Justice Academy training program, you'll end up like me or hopefully somewhere even better. So anything I can do, you guys can also do as well. But it's very nice to meet you all. I started off in the same place as many of you.
Wow. Andrew, I didn't know you were from Western Australia. I've spent quite a bit of time in Perth, so I should have known by the accent. Beautiful,
Fantastic.
beautiful people there. Well, okay, so Andrew, before we discuss whether plant-based eating for dogs and cats is viable, set us up a little. Why is the food we're feeding dogs and cats something we should be paying attention to?
It's interesting that we have given so much attention to the livestock sector in global debates about climate change and sustainability, and also the well-being of so-called food animals or farmed animals. Around about 80 billion of those are now being slaughtered every year. That's land animals, and 1 to 3 trillion fish as well. So much attention has been paid to the food system, but really just to the human food system. We've kind of forgotten about the pet food sector. But actually, just in the last few years, studies have started to come out looking at the impacts of the pet food sector. And the first widely read one was by University of California, Berkeley researcher in 2017. And he calculated that 25 to 30% of the impacts of the livestock sector in the US are due to pet food, not due to human consumption, they're due to pet food.
Wow.
If we were to apply that globally, it would equate to about 5% of all greenhouse gases coming from being caused by the pet food sector. So it's really interesting because we know the entire transportation sector is responsible for about 13.5% of all human generated greenhouse gases, and there are armies of people working on that issue, on sustainable transport. For something that's potentially causing 5%, even if it's a bit less than that, still a major proportion of all greenhouse gases. The number of people worldwide working on that seems to be one person in Canada, maybe, myself kind of part-time, and odd other researchers doing little bits and pieces. So it's an incredibly neglected area, an incredibly important area as well. There's huge potential to make a difference for greenhouse gas production, also farmed animal welfare, and the well-being of cats and dogs as well.
Mm. And how many dogs and cats are in households around the world right now? What's the sort of figure?
Yeah, I think the estimate is there are 1.1 billion owned cats and dogs, and of course there are many more stray cats and dogs as well,
Mhm.
and feral cats and so on. But yeah, about 1.1 billion. So there have been 3 studies now comparing the dietary ecological paw print of cats and dogs with the ecological footprint of people.
Wow.
And it varies quite a lot depending whether it's a large dog, small dog, or a cat or whatever. But it seems clear that for a medium-sized or a large breed dog, the impacts are equivalent to or greater than those of human beings in developed nations. And there have been 3 studies looking at 3 developed nations now. So we've completely forgotten to consider this issue. We've really overlooked it on a global scale, and it's really important.
Mm. Well, and the other thing that I didn't have a really good handle on for a long time, Andrew, is there's some pretty shocking stuff going into standard commercial pet food. Like, are all the stories that I'm hearing true?
Yeah. So we've been concerned for virtually decades about low quality ingredients going into pet food. That is the byproducts from the animal slaughtering industry, the parts that are less edible or not edible by human beings, as well as all sorts of processing chemicals, preservatives, some of which are known to cause various disease risks, and quite often have actually been banned in European nations, but are unfortunately still allowed in the US. So for a long time, we've been concerned about ingredients like these, but I don't think those are the most hazardous ingredients. What we've found from the large-scale health studies that have been published just in the last 2 years is that there seem to be a consistent set of benefits for dogs and cats maintained on nutritionally sound vegan diets, and they relate to 2 clusters of dietary hazards in the meat-based pet foods. The first set, I think, is animal-sourced allergens. Dogs and cats being fed nutritionally sound vegan pet food are simply not being exposed to animal-sourced allergens such as beef, lamb, pork, chicken, and they seem to be consistently across multiple studies having benefits with respect to their skin, less itchy skin, less external ear canal problems, and also gastrointestinal reactions. The second cluster of benefits seems to relate simply to excessive calories. Dogs and cats on nutritionally sound vegan diets seem to have lower rates of obesity, being overweight, musculoskeletal disorders, and mobility problems. So I think actually that the historical attention that we've had towards low quality and hazardous ingredients in pet foods are actually not as important as what we're finding out just recently, which is the exposure to animal-sourced allergens and probably excessive calories in meat-based pet foods compared to nutritionally sound vegan pet foods. They seem to be resulting in much more obvious and measurable health effects.
Well, and I mean, okay, so is it as bad as, I've heard that like some of the garbage meat from the grocery stores, for example, is being thrown in there and often with their packaging, and it like is stuff like that still happening?
Yeah, there have been repeated reports of meat that sort of passes its use-by date in supermarkets being sent off to rendering plants and recycled into pet food, not always with styrofoam packaging, plastic removed because of that increases labour costs, and in order to keep costs low, various other things have been reported as well, such as unfortunately there have been repeated reports over a period of time that have been investigated by the FDA about low levels of euthanizing solution being found in pet food, suggesting that actually euthanized cats and dogs from animal shelters are finding their way into pet food. And there was initially a thought that this was something that was a problem many years ago and has since been found no longer to be the case, but unfortunately it has again been found to be the case more recently. So there are those concerns as well. As I say, I don't feel that those are the major problems. I feel the major problems are the ones that seem to be resulting in consistent increases in health disorders in animals fed meat-based pet food compared to nutritionally sound vegan pet food. And those seem, I think, to relate to animal source allergens and excessive calories. But there are those other concerns as well, and they've been around for a long time, unfortunately.
Okay, let's get at it. Tell us about the latest studies around plant-based food for dogs and cats. Like, are these game changers as far as you're concerned?
They are game changers. There was very little that had been published until around about 2 years ago. And since then, there's been a slew of studies and more are coming. And they tend to be large-scale studies looking at thousands of cats and dogs, which is great because it provides us with statistical reliability and confidence that we can extrapolate results to the wider population of cats and dogs. So we've now got around about 8 studies, or veterinary student master's theses in dogs and 2 in cats that have been published so far. And there are more coming as well. I've personally got a couple of major ones coming. One of them may be published just within the next few weeks to months, which is very exciting. And other researchers also have studies coming that I'm aware of. And looking at these studies across the board, there have been some very exciting results. The most recent published large-scale study of health outcomes in dogs was by researchers at University of Guelph Veterinary School in Canada.
Yay!
They found that, and they found that on average, the dogs maintained on the vegan diets were living 1.5 years longer than dogs maintained on meat-based diets. And we have a rough rule of thumb within the veterinary world that 1 year of a dog life is equivalent to roughly 7 years of a human life. 1.5 years is around about an extra decade. So if you think of your own family, what it would mean if somebody lived another decade at the end of their lifespans. Not only are they getting extra time, but they seem to be getting a better quality of life as well because of the reduction in rates of problems such as itchy skin, ear canal problems, better mobility, and so on. So that's hugely exciting. We are seeing these sorts of benefits consistently across multiple studies, and there has been no health disadvantage that has occurred across multiple studies in animals on vegan diets. So I think the combined weight of evidence is now pretty clear that the health of vegan dogs is as good or better than those of dogs on meat-based diets, and probably for cats as well. There have been 2 good studies published on cats, and there's another big one coming that we have done. We've controlled for differences across dietary groups in things like age, sex, location of the cat, some other aspects. And we've not only did the vegans do better, but we've also quantified precisely how much better they did in a whole range of health parameters as well. So it's very exciting. Most of this has only occurred in the last 2 years. If anyone wants to look at short summaries of those, they're on the website where I'm listing all these, which is sustainablepetfood.info.
Kirsten's got it. Kirsten will put it in there. Yeah, there we go. So sustainablepetfood.info.
Yeah, if people click on articles, they'll get the short summaries. And as more of these are published, I'm adding them there. As I say, most people simply don't know about this information yet. This is one of the first times this has been brought to a primarily North American audience, although I appreciate there are people from everywhere in the world, which is really good.
That is a very exciting stuff. Okay, now our folks here in AJ, they like to get into the gritty stuff. And so can you break down a couple of these studies for us, these bigger, studies like how many subjects over how long and what, some of the, you don't have to do them all, but if you can take the ones that you feel are most significant for dogs and cats, that would be really helpful.
Sure. So off the top of the head, the ones that we did was a study of more than 2,500 dogs and more than 1,300 cats. And they had been maintained on these diets for at least 1 year, which is quite a long period of time in a dog or a cat's life. We published the dog one last year in PLOS One, which is one of the world's leading open access scientific journals. So it's freely available on the internet. And it's attracted a lot of attention. And the cats one, I very much hope will be published in the next few weeks, possibly months as well. And as I say, that shows those sorts of benefits as well. Other key studies have come from the researchers at the University of Guelph Veterinary School. The one on dogs recently showed that they lived, as I say, 1.5 years longer on average than the meat-based dogs. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure how many dogs were in that study. I think it was probably in the region of 2,300 plus. But the brief summaries of this on sustainablepetfood.info under articles, if anyone wants to look at all of them.
And Andrew, can you take us through some of the categories of testing? I know that they test as far as things like just plain old health, but also will they eat the food? Things like that. Can you take us through a little bit of that?
Sure. While I've listened to you, it's so quick and easy to get this information from our website. I've just looked up the Canadian study. That was 1,100 plus dogs, including nearly 360 feeding solely vegan diets. Regarding do they like their diets? That's a really interesting question. Many people are concerned about whether it's somehow cruel to maintain carnivorous species on plant-based diets. It's worth remembering, I think, a couple of things. One is that dogs aren't really carnivores. They're biologically omnivorous. They've co-evolved with humans for 20 to 40,000 years to eat a whole variety of scraps, basically from human campfires, most of which were cooked starchy root vegetables with some meat scraps in there as well. Cats have been domesticated for around about 8,000 years, and their role has been to guard our food supplies from rodents in particular, so they're still biologically carnivorous. This is sort of academic interest, but it's not really very relevant to the domesticated cats and dogs today, who are fed a variety of body parts from animals they'd never naturally eat, such as cows, chickens, fish, and so on, with all sorts of unnatural additives added in at predictable times in dry kibble or from cans. So if you think about the natural feeding regime of the cat, for example, they would have in the wild sort of consumed a variety of small mammals, birds and insects, which they would eat at unpredictable times following a kill of a prey animal, after which there'd be an uncertain period of hunger. There's a wonderful example that Jed Gillen provides in his book, Obligate Carnivore, about cats and their diets. And he says, if you want to see whether cats are happy eating unnatural pet foods, then try this experiment. Skip your cat's breakfast one morning and instead take him or her down to the beach. Observe your cat closely to see what natural instincts will kick in. Note whether your cat will suddenly bolt out into the waves, swim 50 or so miles out into the deep ocean to battle an adult tuna fish that can be as large as a horse in an underwater battle to the death in order to fulfill the natural feline diet of fish. The idea that cats would do this is completely absurd. They're notoriously hydrophobic. They're descended from desert creatures, and so on.
Yeah,
so
people think fish is a natural food to give to cats.
He's making the point that this just demonstrates the ability of cats to very much enjoy products that are entirely unnatural to them. Mm-hmm. What's important, I think, is not what we think about this matter, whether people think it's cruel and whether other people provide information as I've just done, but really what do the animals think themselves about these different diets. And how do you find that out? You find that out by actually studying their behavior at feeding times. So we did that. We studied 2,300 plus dogs and 1,100 plus cats, and got detailed information about the behavioral signs when eating their meat-based food versus their vegan diets. And we studied every known parameter of behavioral palatability, which is how much they enjoy their food, that had been previously described in scientific literature, and some extra ones that hadn't. We looked at 15 signs in cats and 10 in dogs. And once we'd done that and we analysed this all statistically, we found no significant difference in behavioural indicators between cats and dogs fed meat-based or vegan pet foods across the board. We found, as far as you can tell by detailed study of their behaviour, that cats and dogs on meat-based on vegan pet foods seem to be enjoying their food just as much as those on meat-based pet foods. So when you ask the animals themselves, by studying their behavior, they seem to be just as happy on those diets. And I think until we learn to actually talk to them one day, that's probably the best that we're going to be able to do.
So there's lots of great questions coming up, and folks, if you do have a specific question, you can do ***Q in the chat just to differentiate from just regular chat. So we can't get to all questions, but I'll try to weave them in here. I think I've heard you say something that really hit me, and not just for our cats and dogs, but for ourselves, and that is, it's the nutrients, not the ingredients, that matter. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the most common objection that people have to the idea of vegan food for cats and dogs is the idea that cats and probably dogs must need meat. And of course, what everybody forgets is that cats, dogs, and all species don't have requirements for meat or any particular ingredient. What they have requirements for is nutrients, instead of nutrients that are appropriate to that particular species. And if we formulate diets that supply all the necessary nutrients from plant, mineral, and synthetic sources, then there's no biological reason why the animal shouldn't thrive on that diet. The other two things that the diet needs to be is it needs to be adequately digestible, so the nutrients will successfully get into the bloodstream and circulate around the body to reach the cells, and also adequately palatable, so the cats and dogs will be happy to eat those diets. And as I say, we've studied palatability with very large numbers of cats and dogs, and found that overall the vegan diets do not have any significant difference compared to meat-based pet foods. With respect to digestibility, no ingredient has 100% digestibility. In general, the ranges are sort of 70 to 90% for most ingredients. And there doesn't seem to be much of a difference with the ingredients in vegan pet food compared to meat-based pet food with respect to digestibility. So there you go. Those are the three requirements that they need. They need to be palatable, digestible, and nutritionally sound. And the modern vegan pet foods are formulated to meet those three needs.
And so can you talk, though? I mean, we can't just give dogs and cats just any old plant-based food. Can you talk about what we need to look for in order to have like a complete diet? Because it's not just as simple as giving them plant-based food, of course.
Yeah, absolutely right. You can't just toss a bunch of veggies and leftover cake and things onto a plate and hope that your dog will be perfectly happy. It probably will be very happy, but it won't be
not in the long run, no.
if you keep doing that. So it is important to be feeding a diet that is nutritionally complete and reasonably balanced as well. And it's important to firstly, I think, check labeling claims on the packaging. Look for signs that it is being formulated to be nutritionally complete and it's not being designed to be a treat, a snack, or a supplement, but is intended as a complete meal. Secondarily, people should be seeking to purchase these diets from reputable companies that ideally are working with nutritional experts, particularly veterinary board certified nutritionists. And the other thing I think is that companies ought to be willing to provide information to demonstrate what steps they've taken to ensure nutritional soundness and good quality of their products. Ideally, this information should be on their websites, and the gold standard would be something like independent laboratory analysis showing that their nutrient breakdowns match those provided by nutritional authorities. And very occasionally, companies will do that. Certainly, companies should have information available to indicate the steps that they've taken to ensure nutritional soundness of their products, and they should be willing to provide this when asked. It ought to be a red flag if you ask these sorts of questions and a company refuses to give you the information or doesn't answer. If that is the case, then of course, just go to another company.
And so, yeah, so for say for the regular person who maybe doesn't have all the time to pour over all the studies and have the what's the simple, like, do you just look for recommendations from people you trust, or are there any sources you can go to for suggestions about particular brands?
Yeah, the top things would be, check the labeling, make sure it is being formulated to be a complete diet, not something like a treat or a snack. And secondarily, get it from a reputable company. And as I say, just look for anything that might indicate that they're taking reasonable steps to ensure nutritional soundness. If there's no information about that, and it's some kind of company that you can't find anything out about, then perhaps steer clear of that one.
So, Andrew, a lot of folks here are probably really familiar with the idea that dogs are omnivores, and it's, feeding them a vegan diet is actually not a big deal. It never really has been. But cats, that's where people go, whoa, whoa, whoa. Okay. As you said, cats are obligated carnivores. So tell us about taurine. Tell us about where taurine fits in as far as vegan food goes and commercial animal food
Yeah,
goes.
that's a great question. Many people have heard of this amino acid taurine that cats need to receive in their diets because they don't have the ability to to manufacture it, which dogs do from other ingredients. But cats need to get it in their diets. If they don't receive it, it can eventually cause visual problems, cardiovascular disorders, birth defects. We first realized that this was an issue, I think, back in the 1970s when these sorts of problems were cropping up, and we discovered that the taurine in commercial meat-based pet food was being pretty much destroyed by the processing, by the high temperatures, pressures, chemical treatments involved in processing, and afterwards needed to be added back in from synthetic sources. So synthetic taurine was added back into the meat-based pet food. Once we realized that was going on, this was done, and the problem went away. The same thing applies to vegan pet food. It needs to be supplemented also with synthetic taurine. And indeed, both meat-based and vegan pet foods need to be supplemented or fortified, if you will, with quite a range of nutrients as well to make sure they're not only getting all the nutrients needed, but also in the right proportions. And that's just a normal part of any pet food formulation.
So that brings us to a question that, is especially thorny, and that is that I think a lot of folks that hear about the harms of commercial meat pet food go to feeding their dogs and cats raw meat diets. So tell us about that. Tell us about where that comes in. And I believe most of these studies also studied the vegan diet compared to the raw meat diet,
Yeah.
right?
So there's a lot of concern about raw meat diets within the veterinary world for two reasons. One is that there have been quite a number of studies showing that unfortunately they're often nutritionally deficient. So they tend to lack minerals and also some of the vitamins that are needed. So that's the first concern. The second concern relates to pathogens. So we're talking about worm larvae, protozoa, potentially other pathogens as well. There have been a body of studies showing that, unfortunately, dogs and cats maintained on raw meat diets tend to have much higher rates of infestations with these pathogens. And unfortunately, it doesn't stop there. People within the households also have much higher rates of infestation with these pathogens. So they're either acquiring it from the cats and dogs, or perhaps more likely from preparation of the meals for cats and dogs at feeding time.
Well, let's stop there. That's something that I think we really have to absorb here. Not only
Yeah.
are the pathogens going to the dogs and cats, but they're heightening
Yeah.
in their guardians.
Yeah, and this is such a large and consistent body of studies. It's not just one or two studies. There's a whole bunch of studies showing what I've just described, that most veterinarians quite strongly recommend against the use of raw meat diets for cats and dogs. And if people are going to persist in using them, it's really important to follow a very careful hygiene during food preparation. If people thoroughly take care of that, maybe it will resolve the pathogen risks, but it's not going to resolve the nutritional deficiency risks, unfortunately.
And cooking the meat doesn't make a difference. Like if I'm just sort of trying to get ahead of what the questions are going to be here.
Yeah. I mean, then it's not a raw meat diet. What people try to do is they try to sort of chill them very substantially as a way to control or kill pathogens as well during the preparation of these diets to very low temperatures, but it's difficult to do and to really be successful at eliminating pathogens.
Well, and I think, the other thing that struck me is like so many people hold this as the gold standard for dogs and cats. And yet in all of the studies, there was definitely vegan cat and dog food scored way higher than commercial commercial meat food, but there wasn't a superiority from the human grade meat diet.
With respect to sort of comparing raw meat to vegan pet food, I'm going to give you a sneak preview. We have our big study of more than 2,500 dogs, and we published the initial results of that last year in the journal PLOS One. It's been reported in more than 400 news outlets worldwide. It's attracted a lot of attention. But what we've done since is we've gone and controlled for the differences between the dietary groups in age, sex, body conditions, some other things. And the raw meat dogs were substantially younger, actually, than the other dietary groups. And that provides a health benefit. Once you take that out, once you control for the differences in age and all other significant factors, the apparent good health of the raw meat group dropped substantially. And it became clear that the healthiest group overall was the group on the vegan diet. So once again, we have another study showing this. So we'll be publishing this in the coming months as well. It's a very exciting new set of results. We've gone ahead and actually been able to quantify precisely how much of a difference does diet make in key parameters such as how often is your dog likely to need medication, how often is it likely to visit vet, how likely is it to be unwell, how many cases of health disorder is it likely to have if it is unwell, and so on. So we've quantified all that, and that'll be published in the next few months. But it's clear that when you control for the effects of age and other variables, raw meat is not as healthy as it seems. It's the healthiest diets are the nutritionally sound vegan diets.
Okay, well, I want to throw some questions at you from our crew. Karen is asking, let's see. Someone was asking about, could you give a little bit more information around the quality of taurine, how you figure that out, like if they're making their own vegan food and needing to add, obviously, that supplement, is there anything that they should be looking out for?
Yeah, I unfortunately no longer recommend that people try to make their own food at home because, again, there've been a body of studies showing that even when experts try this, even veterinary nutritionists, too often they get it wrong. It seems to be pretty difficult to do to actually formulate diets that are nutritionally complete and correctly balanced as well. So I think it's best actually left to the experts, i.e. the companies, working in conjunction with board certified veterinary nutritional specialists to try and get the formulas right, rather than trying to do it at home. If people are trying to do it at home, of course, they do need to try to consider all the necessary nutrients and make sure that supplementation is occurring. Getting down into the nitty-gritty of one type of taurine versus another to be adding in, I haven't looked at that level of detail myself. I'm not a sort of someone who formulates a diet. So I'm more somebody that studies the health outcomes and the behavioural outcomes. And the closest we've gotten, I think, is to do a study of all the manufacturing steps taken by companies, all the way from designing the diets in the beginning to transporting them to retailers at the very end, and everything step in between involving manufacturing. When we did this, we found that the plant-based diets were being produced to slightly better standards overall than the meat-based diets, but we didn't really find a lot of significant difference between the groups. I'm sorry, but we didn't get into the precise details of which supplement with respect to taurine or any of the other ones.
So this is really good to know, because good to know that I know a lot of people are trying to be environmental and and giving that loving sort of nourishment by creating their own food, but it's good to know that is not recommended. So Andrew, question that keeps on coming up: what food, what brand, like do you have any that you really kind of know or have heard are really the ones that you can we should be migrating towards?
Sure. I don't recommend any particular brand. There are a lot of companies that would love it if I would recommend their brand, because I'm one of the two people that's publishing most of the research in this area these days.
I figured there's probably some bias that you have to watch out for.
Yeah. So what I do is I recommend that people, as I say, look for products that are clearly labelled as being nutritionally complete and that are being
and will
produced.
they actually be labeled as nutritionally complete? Is that it'll say that?
There might be slightly different terminology in different parts of the world, but they should say something like nutritionally complete and balanced. And in the US, they might include the terminology AAFCO guidelines, which is the Association of American Feed Control Officials, and they produce the nutritional guidelines that pet foods are supposed to be formulated to meet within North America. There are different ones within Europe, but wherever you are, it should say something like nutritionally complete, and it should come from a reputable company that is hopefully working with nutritional specialists and producing diets to very good standards. On my website, sustainablepetfood.info, I do have a long list of suppliers in different parts of the world, which is not up to date because I'm so busy doing all this research, I haven't had time, sadly, to do that. But it's nevertheless a starting point. If you are choosing a company that is less well established, then definitely look into what steps they're taking to ensure the diet is a good one, is nutritionally complete and is of good quality. But sadly, I can't sort of endorse any particular.
Yes, understood. And so again, it's go where the people in the know are. And there's a lot of people in the know in this chat right here. So
can I also say that within the United Kingdom where I am, if you're a veterinarian like myself and you endorse something, you have to be a bona fide user of the product. And given that, sadly, due to workload, I don't have any cats and dogs here myself, I guess that means I'd have to eat the product myself. And with respect to vegan pet food, I know that one of the producers in the United Kingdom, in the United States, famously ate some of his own product on national television just to demonstrate that this is potentially human consumable and doesn't include all of the undesirable ingredients that are unfortunately common in meat-based commercial pet food. So, however, I haven't gone that far. I haven't eaten any of this stuff. I'm not a bona fide user of the product. So that's another reason why
I have to admit, Andrew, I've tried my cat's Ammy kibble.
And how did you find it?
It actually tastes good. I like
really?
if it's that good, I'm gonna try it. So I don't eat it as a regular snack, but I thought no, I should give it a go.
Well, congratulations! There you go. You're good if there's a disaster. You've got a supply. Although hopefully you would also prioritize your cats.
That's right. Okay, another question. Natasha asks, I heard phosphorus is bad for dogs and cats. As far as kidney failure goes, and plant-based foods are high in phosphorus. How does one go around that if we feed vegan food to them?
Yeah, I don't think plant-based foods in general are high in phosphorus compared to meat-based sources. If someone had a particular concern about that, they need to look at the specific ingredients in the particular diet that they're looking at and compare that to other options. High phosphorus can indeed be a concern in kidney disease. If someone does have a medical problem such as kidney disease, they should be talking to their vet about the management of that. Diet certainly is something to be considered in kidney and other diseases as well, and it's good to probably bring in the packaging so your vet can see what the specific ingredients are and perhaps get some information about some of those as well.
And I guess that brings me to another question, and that is, one of the challenges does seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong, that because vegan cat food in particular is still fairly new and burgeoning, that when there is medical concern and having to feed your cat a special diet for some sort of medical concern, there doesn't seem to be the kind of options in the vegan cat and dog food. So tell us about that. In that case, what do we do?
And that is unfortunately true. This sector is so new, although it's exploding very, very rapidly, and new companies and products are coming all the time, but it is still a very new sector. We're just at the start of the growth curve. Accordingly, there don't really seem to be products available yet for treatment of most medical conditions, with the massive exception, I suppose, of skin disorders. Most of the low allergy diets, a lot of the low allergy diets for cats and dogs just happen to be vegan. They're kind of accidentally vegan. They've been around for many, many years, and they weren't developed in order to make vegan diets. They were developed to treat skin conditions, and it just happens to be that taking out the animal sourced allergens seems to improve skin conditions in a lot of itchy dogs, cats. So they've been around for a long time, but with respect to other medical disorders, unfortunately, there generally aren't prescription diets available for the treatment of them that are vegan at this stage. So if somebody has one of those problems, I would say discuss the management with your veterinarian. Diet may or may not be relevant to that particular condition. If it is relevant, then ask the vet to consider the basic principles, which particular nutrients are of concern in the treatment of that particular condition. It might be phosphorus, it might be something else, and then actually look at the diet that you're proposing to feed. If you find out that it's phosphorus and it needs to be below a certain level, you could even do your own research and see what dietary options are out there. Try to talk to companies perhaps and see if any of them produce low phosphorus diets or whatever it might be. But it is a matter of going down that pathway. Unfortunately, at this time, sadly, there are not prescription diets available for treatment of most medical conditions other than itchy skin and perhaps
Kidney
gastrointestinal
failure,
reactions as well. Yeah.
your urinary tract, like a food is a big one that a lot of people have to go to. And there's, so, have you heard any sort of whisperings from some of those prescription diet, veterinarian type of foods that create those medical grade foods? Have you heard if they're kind of getting the idea that there needs to be movement in this direction?
I should clarify that there are, of course, vast numbers of prescription diets available for all sorts of medical conditions, just not vegan ones. So
yes, of course.
Yeah, with respect to vegan ones, I haven't heard of whisperings yet. It is something that will be driven by the market. When companies think that there is a good market for the provision of such a diet, they'll start to produce them. So look, the more of us that go to the companies and ask those questions, do you have any prescription diets for condition X? When will you be producing one? Could you look into one? Then hopefully at some point critical mass will be reached and they might start to bring them out. But at this stage, nothing, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. And also, I know that all of these vegan cat and dog food companies are working hard to scale up and everything. I think that's it's a really great place to, if you want to do some angel investing, that is a great place to do it, to be able to make that happen faster. So,
the other thing I would say, if you want to do any kind of investing and you're not an angel, let's say that you're a demon instead and you just want to make vast amounts of money, it's also a really good sector to invest in because the global vegan pet food sector was valued as being worth $9 billion by 2020 and estimated to go up to $16 billion by 2028, which is a compound annual growth rate of 7.7% per annum. So it's a very fast growing sector. It's one to make a lot of money in, even if you're not an angel and you just want to make money. Now, that exciting growth curve is something that was calculated prior to all of the new evidence coming out in the last 2 years about the health benefits of vegan pet food and also the environmental sustainability benefits. So I think that's now an underestimate. It's going to go up much faster, actually.
Yeah, and that's why this is becoming such an epidemic as far as ethics and environmental impact. Okay, so many good questions coming in, folks. Donna asks, does adding a pet food supplement to homemade vegan foods make it acceptable? I think we've already covered that it doesn't, but I just want to make sure that even when there's that food supplement, it's still not what you recommend.
Yeah, look, a supplement is better than no supplement, but it's unfortunately a bit risky. There have just been too many studies showing that people trying to make homemade diets, even experts, unfortunately, quite often get the balance wrong or the nutrients not quite right. So it's pretty difficult to get right. I would leave it to companies with their in-house experts who are hopefully doing things very well.
This is coming up a lot, and this isn't necessarily specific to vegan dog and cat food, but there does tend to be a lot of kibble as opposed to wet food being offered by a lot of vegan dog and cat food companies. Is there a lot of a difference between the dry kibble and canned food, and what should we be paying attention to?
Um, Either can be formulated to be nutritionally sound. There are some medical conditions for which dry kibble is better and some for which wet food is better. For example, if there's any kind of urinary problem, you may want as much liquid as possible to flush out the urinary system. Wet food and strategies to encourage drinking might be recommended. If there's a dental problem or an animal's underweight for some reason, then dry food might be a good idea to help scrape the teeth more clean, and also because they tend to be more concentrated in calories. So it depends what's going on with the animal. There isn't any predilection for one or the other to be more nutritionally sound.
Mm. And yeah, I mean, for many years, I just added a lot of water to kibble, and that seemed to really do the trick for my kids. Philip Steer, Andrew, I think you might have talked to Philip at some point, but Philip works for a company called Earth Animal, and they're working a lot on vegan pet foods. And so he was mentioning also, not only are they working on plant-based, but they're working on cultivated meat as a solution. Where do you sort of stand in that scheme of things?
Look, I think that's great. The animal doesn't really care, I think, as long as it gets all the nutrients that it needs, as long as it's happy to be eating the food. Hopefully they'll enjoy cultivated meat as much as the vegan pet foods, as much as the conventional meat-based pet foods. So from the animal's perspective, it's perhaps less important than we might think it is. From the environmental sustainability of pet food, it could be absolutely game-changing. There are clearly massive benefits associated with vegan pet food. The initial calculations that I've done show that if the world's 1.1 billion owned cats and dogs were to transition to nutritionally sound vegan pet food, we'd be saving something like 2 to 3% of all human-generated greenhouse gases, more than 1 billion land animals each year from slaughter, freeing up enough food energy to feed a country slightly larger than Ethiopia, which is more than 100 million people each year, saving vast amounts of land, water, pesticides, fertilizers, and so on. So it's really important that we transition off meat-based pet foods for all of these sustainability reasons. To vegan pet foods is fine. To cultivated meat as well would also be fantastic in terms of achieving environmental sustainability and presumably nutritional soundness as well.
Would there be the same concerns though with pathogens and everything with
No,
feeding?
because the crucial problem with raw meat is firstly that body parts are coming from what had been living animals, and there's often the risk of contamination, particularly from the gastrointestinal tract in the slaughterhouse, with the contents of those contaminating other meat parts. That's where a lot of the pathogens come from. So we'd be eliminating that problem, and secondarily, we wouldn't be wedded to this idea of not cooking. The meat, raw meat, of course, is not cooked. So cooking, if done correctly, can kill lots of pathogens. So if you're artificially producing meat, cultivated meat or cell-based meat, you're eliminating the primary source of pathogens. And if you don't have any psychological barrier to cooking it, the remaining risk ought to be negligible.
Mm. Andrew, Victoria, joining us from our a sister team of ours, Be Animals Media, is asking, does Andrew have resources that I can provide to my vets to help them understand that plant-based food is healthy and safe for cats? Now, I'm assuming we're in a vet appointment and they're not going to hand them 10, studies, but is there a particular like one pager or something like that that they might be able to give? What's your recommendation?
Yeah, I guess two things. One is that they're under my website, sustainablepetfood.info, click on articles. There is short summaries to all of the key studies in this area. And at the top of the list is one that just came out, and that's a systematic review. Systematic reviews are scientific studies that bring up all previous evidence and sort of pull it all together and form overall conclusions. So there was a systematic review that's just been published in a good scientific journal, looking at 16 other studies giving insights into the health of cats and dogs on vegan diets. And it concluded that there was no evidence of harm and some evidence of benefits on these diets. So I would just print off the front page, which has the short abstract of these studies, and give that to vets, because it is a systematic review. It sort of carries a lot of weight. That's a helpful thing to do. Second thing is probably the recent New Scientist feature article, just summarising all of the research in this field and the environmental benefits that came out recently. At the very top of this chat, I've provided a link straight through to where the New Scientist article can be directly downloaded as well. So that came out just a few months ago. Demonstrates also the global interest in this field at the moment.
Amazing. And folks, you know, I know we've hit 1 o'clock and some of you will have to leave. We will have a replay for this available for you to watch or for you to share on our YouTube channel shortly. We'll be sending that out in the AJA newsletter, or if you had registered for this, then you will get it within a couple of days. And we will also include some of the links as well that Andrew has referred to. So Kirsten, if you can grab that New Scientist link, that would be great. And so Andrew's been kind enough to say he will give us a little bit of extra time, because there's still so many questions here. And I'd like for you all to feel pretty confident about what you're doing here. Andrew, Jody is asking, can you speak to the issue of carbohydrates in plant-based food? This goes into what Natasha already asked as well, and says, have you seen an increase of animals being hungry and also fatter on a plant-based diet? So I think those kind of go together a little bit.
Yeah, whether animals become overweight or obese really doesn't depend on carbohydrates. It depends on the balance of calories taken in versus to calories expended for normal sort of resting maintenance of the animal, and also any activity such as exercise or other activity, lactation, growth, repair, and so on that the animal's undergoing. It's really not an issue of carbohydrates or not. It really is to do with the imbalance in calories coming in and calories being spent.
So there's really no, there's not a high in a well-balanced, nutritionally sound vegan cat food or dog food diet. There's no more carbohydrates in that than say meat pet food.
Yeah, there are significant proportions of carbohydrates in all pet food other than raw meat pet food. So commercial meat-based pet food, I think the second largest ingredient group is actually plant-based sources, and a lot of that is carbohydrate. That's just normal off-the-shelf commercial meat-based pet food. There's an awful lot of actual carbohydrate in that. Vegan pet food will be likewise, using obviously lots of plant sources with plenty of carbohydrates in them. Carbohydrates are one of the key macronutrient groups that animals need, along with protein. As I say, there isn't any concern, I think, when you look at it from a veterinary perspective, that carbohydrates per se are causing overweight and obesity problems. Those relate to imbalance between calories taken in and calories being expended.
And I'm going to focus in on another macro right now, because Ken Walker said, quoting from your website, Andrew, we are witnessing symptoms of deteriorating health of kidneys failing in middle age due to excessive protein. How do you determine how much protein is sufficient but not excessive?
I don't think that is really a concern. There have been some older studies, and as I say, there's a lot of really exciting, very recent studies involving thousands of animals, which provide better data. But there have been various concerns that arose in some older studies, and some of those are also on my website as well. There isn't any consistent evidence that protein levels are causing health problems in cats and dogs maintained on vegan diets. So I think it's conceivable that in certain medical conditions and certain animals, there could be concerns about that, along with other things as well. But I don't think that is normally a concern in cats and dogs, including those maintained on vegan diets. The problem is usually concerns about a lack of protein in diets rather than too much protein. If animals suffer from certain conditions such as kidney disease, you may want higher quality protein with less potentially harmful waste products of metabolism of those proteins, and not excessive levels of protein in the diet. So, there can be certain medical conditions where you need to be a bit more careful about protein levels. But overall, it's not a concern. If there are any concerns, it's been some diets in the past, whether meat-based or vegan, have been formulated with inadequate protein levels. But then, a lot of those studies are historical and don't reflect what's going on in manufacturing today.
Mm. And no concerns about iron or ferritin sort of thing. Somebody was asking about that as well.
Not really. As I say, there's all sorts of nutrients that cats and dogs need: the taurine, iron, various other nutrients as well, minerals, vitamins. They all need to be adequately supplemented during manufacture. And there are other things as well that manufacturers need to take account of, such as whether those nutrients will degrade over time, whether they should be over-supplemented to take account of that. Those are the sorts of things that we studied when looking at manufacturers to see whether those producing plant-based diets were being as careful as those producing meat-based diets, and were taking steps such as monitoring degradation of nutrient levels over time, adequately over-supplementing to take account of that, and all sorts of other things as well. There's not so
Yep.
much concern about iron or any one other nutrient. It's just making sure that all of them are being correctly added and all the right steps are being followed.
Well, and I think, I was just really shocked by the process of, how commercial meat, pet food gets made. Because I mean, to get rid of or try to get rid of all those pathogens and all of the junk that's being thrown in there, they have to heat it up to such levels. So basically, I'm from my very unscientific background, it seems like they're probably burning away most nutrients and then having to add pretty well everything afterwards. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, there are high temperatures, pressures, and sometimes chemical treatments in the processing of pet food. And there are nutrients such as minerals that are relatively indestructible. But then there are nutrients such as vitamins and also amino acids, which can denature. That means to sort of unravel if you've got a complicated molecule twisted up in a certain way so it works the way it's meant to. And that could be an amino acid. If you subject that to sufficiently high temperatures and chemical treatments, you might actually cause the molecule to unravel and basically stop having the biological activity that it's meant to be having. So yeah, there are fragile nutrients in pet foods, and they can be quite seriously degraded by the temperatures, pressures, and chemical treatments in processing, which is why it's so important to add the degraded nutrients back in after processing has occurred. And the problems have occurred in the past when that's not been done adequately, and that's when there have been studies, particularly from meat-based pet foods, showing that there have been deficiencies in taurine and the need to supplement synthetic taurine back into the meat-based pet foods after processing is finished. And now we do the same thing for the vegan pet foods too.
And Jana has said, so vegan food doesn't need to be heated, probably not to the same degree.
Yeah, the processing of vegan pet food, you wouldn't have the same need to heat to kill pathogens that are found within meat, and the rendering process is something that produces the ingredients used within meat-based pet food, and in this case, sort of miscellaneous meat byproducts tend to be boiled up to a very high temperature, and that produces something like called meat meal, which is sort of this dry sort of mealy product at the end of it once all the water's been boiled out of it. So when you're producing vegan pet foods, you won't need to do anything like that. So there won't be the same high temperatures involved for steps like that.
Okay, Andrew, can you humor us with two more questions?
Yeah, of
Thank
course.
you. We're getting so much out of this. We've had 140 people on this call, and even though we've gone quite over time, we still have a lot of them here. So obviously, there's information here that people are really needing. Shan said a friend successfully with vegan cats has been tracking their pH levels and has occasionally found crystals in their urine. She deals with it with a supplement, cranberry, I believe. Should we be safe by regularly monitoring our vegan cat's urine? Now, is the pH levels, is that something of concern for cats eating vegan food?
Thank you for that question. That's a great one to ask. There used to be a lot of concern about this issue because there were sort of reports, individual cases of people finding that after switching cats onto vegan diets, the urine became more alkaline and that predisposed to crystals forming. And if enough of those form and they all come together, they can form tiny stones and block up the urinary system, which can be a major problem. But now there have been 2 large-scale studies involving thousands of cats collectively, and both of the studies have not found any increased risk of urinary problems in cats on vegan diets compared to meat-based diets. So it must have just been one of those things where there are some stories out there in the, I suppose, the blogosphere and in books which don't represent reality when you systematically look at the population as a whole. It is actually normal for crystals to form within the urine of probably vast numbers of cats and dogs from time to time, in the same way that it's normal for dogs to have a vomit around about once a month, is what we would say in veterinary practice. It doesn't necessarily indicate that this is different from the average cat or dog.
And so, yeah, so it's just generally pH levels in cats are something we need to be watching very closely.
Well,
yeah.
I don't think so. We used to think
Okay.
that was the case, and
Wow,
we used to
okay.
give that advice. But as I say, the only large scale studies that have been done have not shown any increased risk in urinary problems in cats on vegan diets. So it
Oh,
seems
I
to,
just meant generally with cats that urinary tract infections kidney
yeah.
failure, it tends to be one of the things that most sort of kills cats.
If you have a cat that has a problem with blockages, has a problem with crystals forming in the urine, coming together, forming stones and blockages, then absolutely you might well be advised to be monitoring the urine acidity. Your veterinarian would be advising you on that, hopefully. Most of the blockages are caused by or can be brought on by the urine becoming too alkaline. But on occasion, there are some other types of crystals that can be caused by the urine becoming too acidic. So it depends on the particular case. It's very unusual that these problems occur. If they do occur, you need to be talking to your vet about management of them and what to be monitoring for. And they'll be looking at the diet as well, because it's not just a matter of the urine pH. It also very much depends upon whether you're feeding diets that have levels of minerals that cause those sorts of crystals to form. You may want to be trying to eliminate those sorts of minerals from the diet.
Mm, amazing. Okay, so my last question is actually a bit of a double question, and we go back to the studies. And so Natasha was asking, human-based studies often are much larger samples of people and for longer periods. Do you feel the samples are large enough? And Heather asked a similar question, how many years out of some of the longitudinal vegan studies, are involved? So can you speak
Yep.
a little bit to that?
Yeah. So one of the studies of dogs by the researchers from Guelph Vet School, the average duration on the vegan diets, I think, was around about 3.5 years. The studies that I've done involving more than 2,500 dogs and 1,300 cats, they've all been maintained on their diets for at least 1 year, many of them for longer than that period of time. I think it's worth remembering, of course, that 1 year in a dog or a cat's life equates to many years in a human's life. As I say, there is a rule of thumb that a year in a dog's life is around about 7 years of a human life. So these are actually long-term studies within the context of a dog or a cat's lifespan. It would be ideal to have lifetime studies, but we've never asked for evidence from lifetime studies before being happy to accept other diets, such as meat-based diets, raw meat diets, commercial meat-based diets. That's never been the standard. What I think is reasonable is not to be really asking for lifetime feeding studies or very long-term studies, but rather to be collectively looking at the weight of evidence from all the studies on this issue and being willing to update our positions as new studies are published. We now have a good weight of evidence from around about 8 studies in dogs and 2 in cats, and more are coming. And the ones I know of have consistent results, and they clearly show that providing the diet's formulated to be nutritionally sound, then dogs and cats on vegan diets can be expected to have health outcomes as good as, and in some cases better than, cats and dogs maintained on meat-based pet food. With respect to environmental sustainability, there's clearly no downside. It's all just positive, and the benefits are really strong. So we do, I think, need to be willing to be open to new evidence as it arrives, and be willing to change our positions. And if we haven't been feeding these diets to date, we should, I think, really be looking at doing so.
Amazing. Andrew, thank you so much. If we can take us off of spotlight, Kirsten, so Andrew can see all of our happy faces here in AJA. And folks, I would love to know from you in the comments, has this changed your mind about something? I mean, I'm about to probably adopt some new ones, and it's definitely made me feel much more confident about going the vegan pet food route, Andrew. So thank you so much. I'd love to hear in the comments if that's the same for anybody else here. But AJers, Andrew has so much knowledge, and as you heard, this is sort of the first presentation really in North America that he's done around this topic. We feel very honored, Andrew, and can we give Andrew a big AJ thank you for being here? Thank you so much, Andrew.
Thank you so much, everybody. For anyone that's interested in transitioning their animal, I do have a little bit of advice on sustainablepetfood.info. There is a summary article there, and it's things like gradually changing the diet and tricks to help your animal be encouraged to try a new diet, things like that. So those are there.
And also, we've got to make sure we're taking our family members to the vet regularly. Every year, do you recommend, Andrew?
Routinely, once a year is a good idea for a general health checkup and potentially vaccinations and anti-parasite and worm products as well. Sometimes more often if the animal is very young or very old, for example, or if there's any ongoing medical condition, and of course more often.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, AJers, for joining us. Thank you that are new to AJA. I hope you will keep joining us. We'll be back here in 2 weeks, folks. Our topic in 2 weeks is going to be about the importance of gathering places for activists and the movement. So we're going to be exploring some really very cool initiatives that are popping up around that. So I hope you'll join us, and I hope you will keep coming back to the course and the Facebook group. And thank you, Andrew, again. Have a wonderful time, and we can't wait to hear about this next study as well.
Thank you so much. It's really exciting. It should be out soon. Thank you.
Excellent. Bye, everyone.